Like Steve said, I was never evaluated. Nobody ever came in my room, and the one time the person did, he walked out. Well, I vowed that when I was the principal, I would spend, and I did, at minimum, unless there was a fire or somebody had their hair on fire, I was in classrooms 2 to 3 hours a day. Now, what was I doing? I wasn't getting anyone. I was taking the copious notes, observing, and I knew every single teacher's classroom routine in my school of 120 teachers. Now, what did that serve me? It had a backfire effect because some parents knew that I was involved, that I knew my teachers, but I didn't just evaluate them without, another word Steve said, supporting them. Anybody who was below standard in my book, and I let my union people know it, I gave them a heads up, and I said, I will be working with teacher A, and it takes hours of work, not pawning it off to another person, excuse me. It's the principal's job. It's the principal's job to help that teacher, and not just say, go observe someone. That's good, but I took that as my job and worked with that teacher. And I'm going to just end by saying, as far as what happened with parents, when they got the word that Haskin is out on the block and knew everybody, well, guess what? Parents would come in and they had an issue with the teacher and they want to see that teacher's evaluation. They demanded it. They said, we want to see what you're saying about them because we know you know about it. So to answer that part of the question, no. I, as a principal, will never feel comfortable sharing memoranda, comments but that's between me and the teacher. And another thing I did, at the end of the year, I expunged it because it's all about improvement that you said, and I could talk about this. This is a very critical issue. And one last thing, and I'll shut up. Tying test data, I would have hated to be a principal if my teachers had value added. Not that value added doesn't tell me. I don't need value added data. I knew. I could give you a list of who would be the least effective to the most effective because I knew my teachers. But I'll be darned if I would want to be in that school when that data was published. I thought that was heinous. And I will always think that because where do you go from there with the morale at your school? I'm done.
Good point.
Can I...
Thank you. Sarah Lynn Paul?
Can I just point out as a parent the ongoing necessity of evaluating the cost-benefit from all this, reflection and analysis of the teacher's job on the actual time a child has with their teacher to be learning. So, you know, it's one thing to come in and offer, you know, take notes and get an assessment like that, and it's another thing to spend so much time measuring that you have no time left to do what it is that is being measured. I mean, I think that goes without saying, but as a parent, it needs to be said over and over again.
Thank you. Paul, last words?
Well, I think one of the, here my private school slip is probably going to show, but one of the problems in big systems is that it's very hard to evaluate the things that are truly important. I don't know how many of you remember reading The Little Prince of Saint-Exupéry, where he says, what is essential is invisible to the eye. What's important is what's in the heart. What's important in the classroom is joy, magic, passion, excitement. And to me, when I was for 22 years the headmaster of a private school, I would go into classrooms and look to see if that was there. I would ask my assistant head to look and see if that was there. We would work with the teachers. We would talk to them about what was missing in their classroom. And ultimately, if they couldn't bring at least some of that kind of excitement to the classroom, we would try to counsel them out of teaching. Well, that's a private school. It's a little harder to do that in a public school system. But it seems to me that in the final analysis, that's what we have to try and figure out. We have a dropout problem across the country. And the dropout problem is in part, I believe, because of this emphasis, as Steve mentioned, on testing. And it bores the kids, it bores the teachers, and it doesn't speak to those things that are important inside each kid. And
Thank you.
So how do we figure out how to measure that? I don't know. It's easier to do in smaller schools than it is in big systems.
Marcy,
Thank you.
may I?
Yes.
Steve commented that it was a good first step. I don't know if it's a general knowledge to the public that the researchers that Daisy brought in to negotiate his original format, they were from Wisconsin. We all know the history on Wisconsin. The audacity to spend our time negotiating an evaluation system for a state that has just disavowed collective bargaining and all sorts of things. Currently, it's tied into this, yes, we have a pretty good system, but it's also threatened to be undermined by a core waiver. 9 local districts have received a waiver from the federal government for the, was it Leave No Child Behind, Race to the Top? Here we go, help me out with the acronym. Thank you, No Child Left Behind. They essentially are overriding the authority of the Secretary of Education for the state of California. This is to say that this decision by Arne Duncan is going to be one that is going to be debated, and I'm sure it's going to end up in the courts. Because as you know, there's no way the federal government should have made a decision to grant an individual school district, 9 of them, authority basically to underwrite what Steve has said was negotiated and deemed in the best interest of our educators. And I just thought it was very pertinent to...
Do you know if Santa Ana was one of those districts?
I do not know.
Yes, it was. So, again, the new assistant, the advisor to our Mayor Garcetti, is the former superintendent of Santa Ana, and this is one that
everyone else has chimed in. Can I add my 2 cents?
Sure.
Okay. As a teacher, I kind of feel like I have a stake in who evaluates me and how I get evaluated. I was part of a team that actually met with Steve maybe 5 or 6 times, and Steve was gracious enough to have us come in and talk about a plan that both UTLA had and CTA had for evaluation. And there were hundreds of teachers that worked on this plan and brought it to the school board. Steve was one of the people that actually listened to us. And unfortunately, not a whole lot, you know, that our evaluation plans are being thrust upon us. We don't really have a say. And one of the big problems I have as a teacher is when other people who are not part of what I'm doing, part of LAUSD, part of the teaching community, come in and impose their ideas on how I should be evaluated. And Steve understood that, and unfortunately at the time the president of the school board did not, but as a teacher I want to have a say for who evaluates me, and we're having problems because we don't feel like we have a stake in it, so why should we commit it? And,
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. United Teachers of Los Angeles has consistently opposed tying teacher tenure, now based on a seniority system, to student test scores. Opponents of seniority argue it discourages innovation, protects bad teachers, and promotes instability at struggling schools with a preponderance of new teachers. Supporters, however, of the seniority system say it values experience and professionalism while maintaining teaching as a career, a profession, not a revolving door with cheap recruits from Teach for America. Should we keep the seniority system? Last hired, first fired. What do you think, MJ?
Well, I started off as a non-seniority teacher. I might add, I started on an emergency contract when I made a transition from relocating back home from New York, where I was not in education, to Los Angeles. So as an individual and as a representative of UTLA, we certainly support seniority. But we support seniority and tenure with some of the alkalites, let me say, that have been raised as it relates to teacher evaluation. Because we're talking about seniority, and yes, you're talking about, but you know, you're going into teaching because you're a lifelong learner. And when I thought about this question, I have to say, I thought about a kindergartner who I could see. You have the kindergarten in the playground in the front, but my class was located way in the back where the bungalows. And I can see this child being brought by the principal, and I could see the mother, and I could see her in a very dramatic situation. Well, I grabbed a teddy bear. I said, okay, they're bringing her to me. I grabbed my teddy bear, and I met them at the door. I came out, and I says, gave her a hug. Now, you know what the regs say about touching, but she needed a hug, and she needed a teddy bear. And I told her to squeeze that teddy bear whenever she was thinking about her mom, that I missed my mom, because granted, I was at work, but believe me, I'd like to be home with my mom too, okay? And that the other children in the classroom, I beckoned to her mom, as our back was turned, leave us, leave us. That child and that teddy bear entered that classroom. She was not forced to have to join a group. She was encouraged, again, to hug the teddy bear whenever she felt sad. And of course, her classmates were encouraged to be loving and kind to her when we went on the playground. Could a brand new individual, straight out of college, have mastered that? I say not. That was because of training. That was because of the investment I made to educate myself so that I could be of better service in a learning community.
Thank you, MJ. Steve, I'm interested in hearing your thoughts about the seniority system. I have a lawyer friend who said, you know, people don't realize that the seniority system also protects LAUSD because otherwise you might have a lot of lawsuits over teacher firings, arbitrary firings. I don't know. What do you think?
I don't know what I think about that, but I can, well, I believe in seniority. I believe in what I would call, we don't have a system solely based on seniority. We include other factors in terms of specialized skills and things like that when we're determining assignments. I was a very different teacher my 5th year than my 1st year. I was a very different teacher my 10th year than my 5th year. And experience matters. And to say that it doesn't is to misunderstand teaching as a profession and a growth cycle. Let me challenge us, because let me say 2 things. First, schools that work best, I believe, were schools that were functioning under what used to be known as the Rodriguez Consent Decree. And let me take you back in history a little bit. Ron Rodriguez was both a teacher and parent in East LA. I'm never going to get through this in 30 seconds. Let me say it like this. We need to establish schools that have a dynamic mix of new teachers and the energy that they bring, mid-career teachers who provide a stability at that school site, and veteran teachers that have the expertise and the wisdom that form this dynamic mix of energy at a school. And we need to incentivize that, and we need to be creative about how to make it happen. And we have to do one more thing, and this is really controversial. We have to find ways to make sure that our best teachers are with the students who need them the most. And that's not an easy thing. There's some pain and some courage and some struggle that's involved in that. But, you know, we have to understand that we're not in a system that has equality of outcomes. And none of us who hold our democratic principles close to our heart should be okay with that. And so if we reject the many things that we're rejecting tonight, We've got to talk about what we're for. And what we're for can't only be about funding out, I will lead the march on funding. But it also has to be about creative and innovative and courageous ways to bring the best of public education to where it is needed the most.
All right. Thank you very much. We have a couple of other questions, and then we're going to give the panelists an opportunity to wrap up, and then we want to hear from our audience. The new year has begun at our schools. We're all facing challenges, surely. What are some of the challenges that you think are most urgent? Who would like to take this one? Lauren?
So, one of them in particular is something that I call my law of diminishing returns. As a teacher, I'll explain this to you. And so what happens is you go in the school has lower enrollment. So I'm facing lower enrollment right now. And that leads to letting go of teachers. And so because we've let go of teachers, that means that we have higher class size numbers. And also means that we have empty classrooms. Now because of Prop 39, that allows a co-location to come in, and that with the higher numbers, that means that we have a lower per student time. Now that leads to lower scores, which leads to parents moving their students out of the school. And now that means even lower enrollment. And the whole cycle happens over and over again until the charter school has all the students, the co-location has all the students that originally was in the public school. And that's what we're facing I feel, what we're facing at my school right now.
Perhaps Steve, MJ?
Let me address the two issues. First, I'll chime in on Lauren's question. I want to correct one thing. They don't have all the students. They don't have the special education students. They don't have. And I want to give credit where credit is due, since myself and a number of other people have been just raging about this for the last 4 years. We have some schools that do remarkable work. Wish Charter, Chime Charter are what charter schools were supposed to be about in the first place, which are incubators for change, true schools of innovation. And I'll lie down on the tracks for these schools, because that's what the charter movement was supposed to be about. We also have schools that are doing a little bit of a better job with what we call high incidence students. And those are students who have situations that are fairly easy to deal with. But low incidence students, students with autism, students with multiple disabilities, Lauren, those are not in the co-located charter. Those have remained in the those students have remained in the LAUSD. So when we talk about co-locations, when we talk about declining enrollment, when we talk about the charter school explosion in Los Angeles, I want to frame it in a particular way. First, none of us should be opposed to choice. We should actually value choice. We should embrace choice, and we should recognize that every parent should have choice when it comes to public education, no matter where they live in the city of Los Angeles or LA Unified School District. What we should oppose is a system based on hyper-competition and saturation, influenced by an incredible amount, a limitless amount of private funding. And I'll capture it like this. We have districts surrounding LAUSD, that have similar problems with our outcomes, similar problems with low achievement, similar problems with failing schools, and with scores and other things that are comparably low, if not lower. And I will never understand, as much as I value choice, how choice could be so important in Pico Union and so unimportant in Pico Rivera, where the demographics are congruent. It's not about choice. It's about something very different. We should not oppose choice. And if we do it at our own peril. What we should oppose is what I call almost like a public education Dresden, an experiment of what happens when you saturate a market and create so much competition that we really actually don't know what's going to happen. And until we have the resources to address, whether it's 480,000 students or 520,000 students that are left in the LAUSD system, until we care about those children as much as we care about children and parents who have chosen charter schools, then we have a real problem of conscience. And so let us be mindful of how we talk about and frame these issues. It is not about choice. Choice is a value we should embrace. It is about deregulation and saturation. We don't accept it with our environmental laws. We don't accept it in our banking system. We should not accept it in our public education system.
Thank you. Thank you. MJ, I want you to have the last word on this one. What are the urgent issues facing us? What should we be doing in terms of positive change, as Steve referenced? And then we're going to open it up to questions.
When you said positive change, when you first asked for what are the most urgent issues, I said to myself, let me make a wish list. Okay, and we just had area meetings, and so you can see as a good student, I jotted down some notes. And what are we concerned with? What needs to be addressed? And you guys are very vocal community, and what you do drives a lot of what LAUSD policies they make. So let's talk about class size. We know that we sometimes have 45 students in a secondary class, algebra, you name it. 45 students, I'm sorry, in secondary. That's not going to work too well. Restoration of programs. When we're talking about restoration of programs, we've heard from each of the speakers talk about what does it take to make our children whole. And that means the Health and Human Services, that means the counselors, that means the school librarians, and that means the arts teachers. They all are needed. Local school funding. What is going to happen? We heard a comment that, well, we need money. But part of the problem, LAUSD, is how is the money being managed? Is it being managed in the interest of the students, or is it being managed in the caretakers who are the first receivers of it down on Boltry? Okay, that's why we have a conflict. The effective implementation of the Common Core Standards training. Conversation I had yesterday, LAUSD is responsible. Districts have been training for this across the state, but LAUSD has not made a collective effort to train our teachers. Why not? Well, you've heard about the teacher evaluation. As I told them, it is in the district's best interest not to prepare teachers to roll out the Common Core standards. And they've known about this for years, so 2 to 3 years ago, they should have started training. They did not. In fact, I understand that they kept monies that could be used for training in their coffers. It's called the reserve account. Another area is the right of each child to learning, and this is a civil rights issue. And this is regarding, yes, the issue of suspensions. And they did give stats that said that proportionally, we have student populations that are being discriminated against. But you know the question I didn't hear? Are you implementing the mandated discipline plans that you had teachers and parents and administrators develop? We haven't heard any talk about that. My point is, if they insisted on having those discipline plans rolled out and they supported that, they wouldn't even had a need to have to spend discussion on whether or not they need a suspension policy or whether or not willful defiance should be addressed. It is an issue, but it's a detraction from educating children. So I say, yes, there are many issues that need to be addressed. The time is now. Proposition 30 has guaranteed those monies, but the question is, do we have a group of individuals, and Steve, I know you're one of our buddies, and I know that we have some other buddies on that board, but we have to have administrators representative of what Marcy and Paul, I'm going to give him credit for this, they make a difference in their schools because of the values that they instill, and we need to have more of that in LAUSD, and that needs to start from the top with
Thank
Daisy.
you. Thank you.
Can I make...
I want to thank all of the panelists. We really want to get some input from the audience, and then at the end, you'll each have an opportunity to say a few words.
Can I just make it very quick? Very quick. I just want to point out that all of this sort of fear that Lauren talked about and the opposition to choice, all these things are, as MJ pointed out, they're a distraction from the child actually receiving the energy of teaching in the classroom. It's just secondary to teaching.
Thank you. Cara is setting up the mic. If you would like to ask a question, feel free to line up at the mic. We ask that you direct your question to someone very specific on the panel, and that the panelists respond, if possible, in less than 90 seconds. And the question should not be, should be 30 seconds to a minute. Please make sure it's a question. If it's not phrased as a question, we'll have to move on to the next person. Nick.
My question goes to structure of the district. I heard a lot tonight about work rules and scope of negotiations and things like that. What I'm more interested in is what works in education. It seems to me, based on what was said tonight, that you have a situation where local control, site-based management, that kind of implementation is what will make education better. I'd like to know the opinion of everybody here to break up LSUSD and to break it up as quickly as you can.
Okay, I'm going to ask that we limit the response to 30 seconds if we're hearing from everybody. If you want to respond about whether LAUSD should be broken up. MJ?
I'm going to say one of the uniqueness of LAUSD is the diversity. And I fear that a breakup would, it would diminish that. The other thing as we talk about funding, when you do a breakup, well, okay, it also would impact how the monies are distributed. And again, we have this, it seems like a windfall that is just arrived at our doorstep. That windfall is not guaranteed. I think it's a 7-year formula. So I would discourage a breakup of LAUSD. Someone said, what is our wish or what did we hope for? I believe that we have Rhodes Scholars, we have National Decathlon individuals, we have individuals who have made us proud. We have a magnet program. I'm thinking of LACES comes to mind, where I know people have gone from the east side to the west side. We have numerous schools that support our children and enrich their lives, and so I would like to see the district remain as a whole.
All right, 30 seconds or less. Should LAUSD be broken up? Anybody wants to chime in?
Why would you want to break up what is basically an expression of democracy? I'm not sure I understand the value of particulating what we have.
Thank you. Lauren? Should LAUSD be broken up?
I can understand his point of view. I agree with Sarah that there's no reason, and also with MJ, that it would cause a lot more problems, I feel, than it would cause solutions.
Steve?
If decentralization, autonomy, and localized governance was actually valued and courageously implemented, people wouldn't feel the need to talk about breakup.
Marcia?
I was in the district so many years, and different configurations, clusters, local districts. It doesn't matter. If we break up I agree with MJ, if we break up the LA Unified, we will have the haves and have-nots. We will lose diversity. It's a ridiculous premise. Just start taking care of the problems we have now.
Thank you.
Always looking.
Thank you. Paul?
I agree with the previous two comments.
Terrific. Thank you. Yes, your question.
Hi, I to give a little context. I teach at Hamilton High School, the Hamilton Humanities Magnet. I consider myself one of the luckiest teachers in the district because I teach at one of the nicest high schools and one of the nicest parts of that high school with some of the best kids going, and it's been a great run for me. I'm near the end of that. But one of the things that's interesting about Hamilton is despite all of its luck, the morale is so low that affects the sense of any creative response to our problems. We're sort of like waiting for the next axe to fall. How many years are we away from becoming the next high school to be destroyed? And part of that is a sense that the district administration, I'm not talking about individual administrators, we have a good principal. I'm talking about the district administration from DC on to the school site administrators, just above that level, are so incredibly incompetent and destructive.
Okay, we need a question from you.
I'd like a response. How do you change that incredibly destructive administrative culture that undermines any sense that there's hope?
Okay, Steve, why don't you take that? Well, you won the election. You have to answer.
I'm looking forward to the drink Kara's going to buy me after this. I hope you watch on Sunday morning. I hope you watch the board meeting. I hope you see the change. I think it's real. I think that we have a new day, and I think that we should be ever vigilant about returning to what the situation we've been through for the past 5 years. It causes me rage when people dismiss the question of morale. These are our teachers are the teachers who are supposed to implement this so-called vision that we have, and we have hurt you.
Thank you. Next question.
Hi, my name is Sonny Lloyd. I teach government at Venice High School. My question is for the school board member, Steve Zimmer. Last spring, UTLA rank and file voted overwhelmingly 91% no confidence in Superintendent Daisy for things such as teacher jail, school giveaways, breakfast in the classroom, a lot of ill-conceived plans that he's implemented. Simply put, when is the school board going to take action on that no confidence vote and vote him out of his position?
And you thought the last question was hard?
No, it's not a hard question. It's not a hard question. It's not about John Daisy. It's about all of us. And there's a new school board. There's a new school board leadership. I ask you to see over the coming months if a real system of checks and balances changes things. The problem with John Daisy is that John Daisy was basically allowed to have his first year virtually without any checks and balances. We're all responsible. We're all responsible for morale. We're all responsible for the decisions that were made. And so I would just say that firing John Daisy plays right into the script. And it's not a script that I'm willing. There are scenarios in which I would vote that way. But there's a lot of folks who are waiting to really destroy this district, and firing John Daisy is the script that they would like us to go down. I'm not going to take the bait.
Can you explain that? What script is it that, as a parent, I agree with the question of basically accountability. If you have this kind of massive level of distrust, fear, no confidence, non-functioning, basically a system being destroyed, coming to a standstill, why is this person being given a second chance?
No, it's not a second chance. I mean, I think that the school board has to exercise its leadership, both as policymakers and education leaders. And if we don't do that under the new school board and the new school board leadership, not only should Dr. Daisy be removed, but the school board itself should be removed. And when you talk about, when I talk about the script, there are very, very powerful forces that are waiting for John Daisy, who has the totality of the support of the civic community and the civil rights community right now, to be fired by a school board that's quote-unquote controlled by the quote-unquote incredibly powerful teachers union. And they want to create a civil disruption based on his firing. And I'm not going to play into that script. I'm going to lead, and I'm going to challenge my colleagues to lead as policymakers as we haven't over the past 4 years. We've been afraid to exercise our authority, I think that that's changing. If it doesn't change, you should hold all of us accountable.
But in the meantime, students are suffering and teachers.
Okay. Thank you. Your question.
Okay, yes, this question is directed to Zimmer, but really all of you. We have numerous prototypes of school and education success throughout the country. We don't need to reinvent the wheel here. Mostly important, they achieve this success with very little money on shoestring budgets. An example of this is the SEED Foundation, the SEED Charter School of Washington, D.C. This school has taken inner city kids and turns them into college graduates. They employ, and I want your comment.
Your question. Please raise a question.
The question is, why haven't you addressed this, and is this feasible to employ what they have employed? Separation of the boys and girls, the wearing of uniforms, strict rules and enforcement of the rules, rigorous academic standards, serious preparation for careers, and lengthened school day and year.
All right.Maybe a few would like to respond.
So yes, the answer is yes. We have models like that. Yes, there are elements of that, by the way, that I agree with, elements that I don't agree with. I'm not going to debate each of them. But where we have examples of quality, we need to be able to export them, and we need to grow them. There's a great example of high quality right down the street here at Grandview Boulevard Elementary School. We have the best dual immersion program anywhere in the city. You probably wouldn't know about it, but that program needs to be grown, it needs to be supported, and we don't have to look outside of the system to find these examples. We have them, we need to grow them and support them.
Thank you. Roberta.
Yes, a minute ago you mentioned that there's a threat of a disruption with replacing DAISY and all. For 20 years, California has had its education policy in the hands of billionaires and venture capitalists with no skin in the games, no kids in the system, and no career path there. They've drafted all the different charter movements. We find out after they've been in place hidden clauses like that create the co-location issue. And this chaos is so disruptive to communities and schools. Will you support a 3-year moratorium on new charters, new reconstitutions, and the parent trigger law? Stabilize and allow parents and teachers, the real people, to get to know each other.
This question is for Steve.
He'd be probably the best, but I'll take it from anybody.
Okay, Steve, would you support that freeze?
I'll tell you exactly what I do support. What I do support is changing the law at the state to allow us to have other considerations, especially the most urgent one is saturation, when we consider approving new charter schools. On the reconstitutions, yes, and I don't think that tool is going to be used anymore. And on the parent trigger, that's another example of a law that we have to fight and we have to change. So a blanket, I may not say a blanket 3-year moratorium, but rigorous changes in both parent trigger law and charter law that allow us to, I need to tell you why. There are charters that I support. I know people come at me about them, but I actually believe that they are great examples of innovation. Wish, Chime, I'm a big supporter of Camino Nuevo. And I don't believe we should be afraid of that. What I believe that we have to do is do our jobs, which is be policymakers and regulators, and what we need to do is change the law to do that.
Okay, 30 seconds or less. Paul wanted to say something, then Marcia.
Well, Steve said what I was just going to say, so bravo to you. I don't think we throw the baby out with the bath. There are some wonderful charter schools. They're doing what they're supposed to do. They're being models. And there are some others that aren't so wonderful. So if, as Steve said, the board does its job, they will approve the ones that belong in being, and they will oppose the ones that are saturated or opposed by or promoted by the wrong people or whatever. But again, there are some wonderful charter schools, and there's others that aren't so wonderful.
Marcia.
One quick comment. The one thing that the LAUSD has never been good at is replication of good practices. And if we, I said it at the top of the evening, if we start looking, I'm retired, I'm still saying, if the district started really looking at what caused this entire chaos and confusion and privatization, and really delve into our existing, I understand that question, a moratorium on new stuff, and delve into the real problems that got us here in the first place, and start sharing instead of hiding these schools and good practices.
Thank you, Roz.
This is for MJ and Steve. Steve, I grew up in the 1930s in the PS 61 in the Bronx, New York. We never heard of a charter school. None of these things existed. Public school was public school. In that neighborhood, nobody went to private school, but that was different. We had arts, we had music, auditorium, drawing, civics, arts and humanities. I want to know what it gave me was a curiosity to learn for the rest of my life. I want to know what you think you can do to bring that kind of attitude back.
Okay,
and teachers were teachers and educated, parents didn't educate.
Okay, what can we do to bring back that kind of joy and excitement to public schools? Steve, and then MJ, 30 seconds or less.
Yeah, and it kind of ties in. You can bring it back. Okay, yes, you collectively are what will bring it back. Because you are the consciousness of what needs to be done. And that also then gets back to, we talked about low morale and that destructiveness. And I heard some comment that says, well, we wish they would look into this. No, it has to be vocalized that you want them to do that. When they are putting policies together, new programs, because they go around wherever they go and they pull them out, what they're not doing, there's no accountability measure. The only accountability you hear is, again, is downline. There's no accountability on the person who's bringing it in. I mean, we all have looked at the boards. So to effectuate the kind of change that is needed in LAUSD, it's a whole overall. I agree. You says culture and climate. Well, fortunately, I got elected at some point to be a learning teacher. That was the best thing that could have happened, because that was about bringing about the positive transformation, and that has served me well in terms of helping to build a school, 99th Street, take a lot of credit for that, and Angeles Mesa, in terms of enhancing a learning community. But those were skills that were then acquired. That's what's missing in the bureaucracy called LAUSD. We have a superintendent, but then we have a middle management here. Okay, or central office management. At no point are they held accountable. You have this person who's appointed to guide the ship with no accountability. We have these programs. There's never been an audit that's been effectively implemented. So in order to overhaul LAUSD, it needs them looking at themselves and then saying, how are we gonna hold ourselves accountable to address the services that we want to see provided? Not sitting in a window on the whatever, how many floors you have there, the 24 and saying downward, this is what we are.
Thank you,
they need to be part of the solution.
Lauren wants to say a word. I just want to ask that nobody else line up, because we have to leave the room at some point tonight, and we do want to thank everybody and have an opportunity to talk one-on-one a little bit afterwards. So please, no other questions other than those who are already standing. Yes, question.
Oh, wait.
Oh, I'm sorry, Lauren.
So I just wanted to answer Roz's, I had an idea for Roz's question. First of all, right now California is 48th in per student spending, and we're below Mississippi, and that's a problem, because honestly we don't have the funds per student to supply the programs. We can't do home ec, we can't do the wood shop, we can't do that stuff because we are too focused on English and math only, and this testing culture. So until we all get together and really decide the testing culture is a bad thing and we don't want it anymore, then that's when things will change.
Thank you. Next question. Thank you, Lauren.
Hi, my question is for Steve, of course, the elected official, and for Paul, because of your involvement in the formation of charter schools. I think that charter schools deserve credit for kicking LAUSD in the butt, no question. And yet, The west side of Los Angeles has more charter schools and more co-located schools than anywhere on the planet. And it's just a huge, huge problem. It seems to me that LAUSD, and you know that I've had more involvement with LAUSD than you probably wish I had, but LAUSD has become like a landlord, and there's very little discussion about education policy and curriculum and all of that, and it's more about you guys managing these land use issues.
Right.
So what is the end game? Because if one quick analogy, if we have a pitcher of water that represents all the students on the west side, because that's my area, obviously if we have 3 schools, we're going to fill all those glasses up. If we have 40 glasses, they're all going to be half empty. So what is the end game?
Okay, question.
Well, let me first say that, that it is different on the west side. And warning, I'm going to say something controversial, that choice on the west side is a different thing than it is in other parts of the city where families were locked in schools that were not succeeding for their kids. If we don't own that, then we can't really have the conversation about choice. But it is very different here. And in a lot of places, in a lot of charters, not all, but in a lot of charters on the west side, parents are operationalizing the same choice that they always had. They just don't have to pay for it anymore. And we've got to own that, and other folks got to own that. And so you have a very, very dynamic situation that's going on there that's much more about land and power than it is about educating all kids. And the answers are not simple, but they are going to have to be balanced on the west side towards investing in children and families who have chosen to remain in our schools. And until we have the courage to make that investment, then you're going to have this continued kind of hand-to-hand combat. I will say one last thing.
Okay.
Innovation is happening here in a lot of ways. It happens at some of the charter schools that I mentioned, like Wish and others, and it also happens in our regular public schools. We have to have some innovation standards that we support and target our investments.
And promote our public schools that are doing great things. Yes, question. I'm sorry, we have to move to the...
I know, but Paul...
all right. 15 seconds or less. We want to hear from everybody. Everybody has a question. We want to hear from them.
Can't do it in 15 seconds. On the west side, there are, as you say, a whole lot of charter schools. There are a ton of private schools as well, and every one of them has a waiting list. So there's a demand for quality education, and Steve's answer is the right one. The public schools have to improve the quality of what they're doing, but then the problem is what Lauren said a few minutes ago. They don't have the funds to do it. What's the per pupil, Steve, right now, ballpark?
About 8,000?
About 8,000, that's what I hear. Well, my old school, Crossroads, this year will be spending upwards of $32,000 per pupil, 4 times as much. And obviously, with $32,000, you can offer a whole lot more than you can offer at $8,000. So the parents on the west side do have a choice, and what they choose is quality. Now, I'm not saying that, excuse me, but you cannot reduce class size without hiring more teachers. People say to me, how would you improve public education? I'd say cut class size in half. How would you do that? You have to hire 100% more teachers. Where would you get the funds for that? Well, we'd all have to pay more taxes, and none of us want to do that. $8,000 in LAUSD, $6,000 last year, $5,000 where my daughter works as a counselor in Lenox, $32,000 at Crossroads. The former the former chief of probation few years ago told me they were spending $125,000 per bed to lock a kid up at Camp Gonzales, where we have a program. Connie Rice said, no, it's closer to $200,000 or more.
So we do have the money. It's a matter of
we have the money.
alignment.
We don't have the priorities, and we
right.
don't have the guts to fight for what is
Thank you,
right.
Paul.
Thank you.
Next question.
Hi, I have a statement and then I have a question. I just want to make sure everybody understands.
Oh, no statements. I'm sorry. You need to ask a question, please.
Oh.
Do you have a question?
Okay, yes. I'm very concerned about the arts. This is for Mr. Zimmer and the other teachers, that the arts integration plan that was put forward in July is a sham. And I'm a retired music teacher.
What is the question?
The question is, will you address this as an obvious way of reducing credentialed art teachers and exposure to students? In right now, what they're doing is they're going to keep those teachers and train them to be arts integration teachers instead of working with kids.
It's a resolution to talk about that at the September 10th meeting. Don't be deceived by the language in it. It is, in order to actually get it to the board, the language had to be, to have a board resolution to endorse it. That doesn't necessarily mean we are going to endorse the plan, but we are going to have a public hearing on the plan at the board meeting. I believe that credentialed arts educators are the anchor to making sure what we all in this room believe, that arts education, once and for all, needs to be a right for every child, not a privilege for the affluent and the lucky.
Thank you. Lauren, your question.
Everybody needs to understand that this is part of the privatization of every public institution and every public good in this country, including the public lands. The fracking laws for our Department of Interior were written by ALEC. They're giving away the public lands. Okay, my question is this. Teach for America, and we all have to be concerned about this, whether we, okay. Teach for America, all right, which Michelle Rhee came out of, where they take recent college graduates who don't even have a teaching credential or a graduate degree. They give them 5 weeks of training in the summer, and then they put them into the schools. I read here that 700 Teach for America teachers are going to be placed into LAUSD schools, 90% of them charter schools. My son is 2 years away from graduating. I wouldn't have him watch my dog, much less teach a room full of students.
Okay, Lauren, no question.
How is the school district allowing this, and how is the teachers union allowing it?
I'd like to hear from MJ. Why are all these Teach for America recruits in our schools?
There's a thing called, there's a policy called a Memorandum of Understanding, and that would address how they're being allowed to come in. They also have a caveat. We have returned the majority of our teachers from our RIF list. We do have displaced teachers, but one of the things that district policies would say that these individuals can come in to a teaching position where we do not have expertise, and predominantly they are in the the science and the math areas. Those are two primary areas. But I certainly agree they should not be allowed. That is a circumventing of our employment practices and our contract.
So I was a Teach for America Corps member. I stayed in the classroom for 17 years. But having said that, there are not 700, there are 10 in LAUSD, 10 teachers, and they are placed in bilingual secondary science, math, and special education. And these are areas where we have not been able to fill positions, even with our RIF list.
Thank you. Tina from Venice High School.
Hello. First I want to say thank you to all of you for being here. You bring with you a lot of wisdom and a lot of diversity, and it's really great to hear this conversation. I had a few things to say, but one thing that really caught my ear was when you talk about dropouts. And we typically talk about dropouts. We talk about the underperforming students. We talk about the kids who fail out in 9th grade or 10th grade. What about the dropouts who are the very affluent, very privileged students and families who drop out of public education. How do we entice them to stay in the conversation with the educators and boots on the ground people who are remaining in public school?
Marcia had her hand up. Thank you, Tina.
That is a very important issue, and as I said earlier, it's about connections and relationships. It's about schools that not only teach curriculum, but nurture. And that's what wait, let me just make a point. We have relationships between students and teachers is probably the most important thing that happens to a student in 12 years of learning. And schools where administrators and principals advocate that and make sure that there are relationships and time for that, we go after students and try and get to the student before he or she drops out. Now, I'm not talking about the dropout that you first mentioned. I'm talking about the non-typical dropout.
Well, no, I'm sorry. I want to clarify it. I didn't mean that. I meant, how about opt-out? But dropout. What they're really doing is dropping out. And I want to throw out the words fear and lack of trust. Because that's a big problem in my school, in my neighborhood, with a lot of places that I see. Families who have the resources, who could be great contributors and could be great advocates for public education. I mean, everybody here seems to have a real interest in it, but a lot of families who have an interest and a voice and a political will are not part of the conversation. They've taken those choices, and I'd love to bring them back.
Thank you, Tina. Next question.
Okay. I'm a retired teacher, started out in the slums of the Bronx and taught every single grade in every single school, from the slums of New York to some private schools, very expensive private schools here. Also a mother, and I know that the children's learning experience is only as good.
I'm sorry, your question.
As the teacher that they have. I find it very interesting that nobody here has mentioned why has nobody here mentioned the fact that Finland is rated #1 in the world for their education system?
Why has no one mentioned that Finland is rated #1?
Well, I'll tell you.
Well, let them answer, because we have some others who want to ask questions.
Real quick. In Finland, teachers are treated as professionals. They get very high salaries. They have 5 applicants for every position. And somebody mentioned a couple of times reinventing the wheel. Why has nobody bothered to study what Finland is doing, so maybe we could do the same thing?
Okay.
And by the way, they don't.
Why are we studying what Finland is doing? Who wants to take that one? Anyone? No one for Finland?
I'll talk about Finland.
No homework and rated #1 in the world.
Steve.
I encourage you to come in November. We are going to have a citywide board meeting about teacher recruitment, training, support, and evaluation. We're certainly going to look at models from other countries. The key to the Finnish system is the rigor as well. It's not just compensation. It's not just it's the rigor in the teacher preparation process that is very, very important. We have to look at, though, I just want to say, when people talk about Finland, we have to look at models that are comparable to the diversity of our system. And
Finland probably isn't one of those.
No, we can learn things from Finland, but we have to be we have to know that it's a process of adaptation that to the to the great diversity that we have in the city.
Thank you. Paul, you wanted to respond as well?
Yes, just a quick response to that. #1, in Finland, there's an extraordinary homogenization of the population of students that you're dealing with, and the class size and the teaching conditions are such that well-trained teachers can actually teach. But if you've got 5 classes a day of 45 kids, it's pretty hard to be an effective classroom teacher.
Thank you. Last question from
Marcy,
Kim.
can
Very short.
Just
very
make
short.
a quick a point of commonality. Somebody else, Steve mentioned the necessity of taking a look at what does work and trying to figure out how to replicate that. It's the same issue. It's a big problem.
Thank you. Kim?
Okay, very short. $800 million for iPads and not teachers. And that decision made when Mr. Deasy had stock in Apple. Please explain.
Did everybody hear that question?
You want me to answer?
Sure.
Okay. So it's bond. So it's not. I mean, there are some differences. We have, we talk about our gaps, and I want to be very clear. We have several gaps in LAUSD before we should even talk about the achievement gap. We have by fully investing in early childhood education, because children are not arriving at 5 years old with an equality of experience, and we can change that. We also have a technology gap, and the technology gap is real, and it's going to become more and more and more significant. It was not an either-or question, but if you ask me 1,000 times, should we make sure that kids, no matter where they live and what zip code they live in, and no matter what the education level of their parents is, should they have access to the technology they're going to need to compete, and should we do everything we can to make sure that happens? Yes, we should.
Thank you. Before